With 2020 set to be a great year for gaming, there is some bad news concerning many delayed game release dates, including some of the most anticipated PS4 titles. The new year was supposed to be full of promise, with Q1 and Q2 set for several major video game releases, including many awaited AAA games. While most of the time the first half of the new year is usually full of great games as Easter and summer come and go, this year is different. Very highly anticipated games were scheduled for release early this year, including The Last of Us Part 2 and Cyberpunk 2077. There are many reasons that delays occur, and sometimes the game delay works for the better rather than the worse. For example, a game could be delayed in order to fix major bugs that weren't initially detected, or to polish off some rough edges of a game. Competitive scheduling can also be a major factor when considering video game release dates. As Q1 of 2020 was initially set to be full of epic new titles, the last few weeks have been wrought with news of delays. This is not all bad news though, when you consider that the average price of a new title is currently around £50. Current game prices may force gamers to choose either one or the other when a slew of new titles are released. Obviously, a developer or publisher will want to capitalize on the decisions of a customer, and having serious competition can heavily impact sales. This can be highlighted by looking at the Christmas 2019 movie releases. For some unfathomable reason, the movie's producers of Cats decided it would be a good idea to release the film at the same time as the new Star Wars chapter. This is one of the biggest displays of misplaced overconfidence I have ever seen. While the movie has been heavily criticized as poor anyway, I am sure that had it been released mid-February 2020 it would have done well at the box office. Cinema goers were given a choice of either Cats or Star Wars for their holiday movie experience. I think you know what movie I chose. Anyway, this is an example of poor competitive scheduling, as being that Star Wars is such a big franchise, there was no way Cats was going to make money if a customer was given a choice. The games industry works in a similar way, and the developers of AAA titles such as Cyberpunk 2077 know that gamers often face a hard choice. Even though some massive games have now been delayed, the game Q1 release roadmap now looks a little less cluttered and is actually better from a consumer perspective. Games such as The Last of Us Part 2, Watch Dogs, Legion and Gods and Monsters were all scheduled for late February and early March. Well, Watch Dogs, Legion now stands for an April release, as does Gods and Monsters, both of which make sense for Ubisoft's tax incentives. The Last of Us Part 2 has also been delayed and is expected for May, while massively anticipated title Cyberpunk 2077 was also slated for April 2020 but has now been pushed back until September. This has potentially freed up April for gamers, as a Resident Evil 3 remake has reportedly been scheduled for that month. This means that there will be a steady stream of games coming up to Q2 in 2020 rather than them acting like the proverbial buses. Consumers can now potentially purchase all or most of these games without worrying too much about their bank balance or having to make a difficult decision about which game to buy. From a gaming news site's point of view, this alleviates a lot of stress for me and gives me a wider berth with which to work. While these highly anticipated games have been moved, the first few months of 2020 are by no means devoid of good games. Doom Eternal, Nioh 2, and Predator: Hunting Grounds are all scheduled for March, so the coming months are still littered with potentially great games. So while you may not have to choose between The Last of Us Part 2 or Cyberpunk 2077, you may still have to choose regardless, as even minor games can still be costly. Some other surprise delays, however, include Marvel's Avengers and Dying Light 2, which have been delayed until September and quote-unquote indefinitely, respectively. Even though the first half of the gaming year has been more evenly spaced, it has only served to clutter the second half of the year with great games to choose from with the run-up to Christmas. This could be a sales ploy since publishers and developers know that holiday sales are extremely lucrative as people buy these games as gifts for loved ones. Whether these delays will have an impact on sales remains to be seen, although judging by the potential quality of these titles, I would think not. However, I do suspect that further delays will be implemented, especially for games that have only been announced relatively recently, such as the rather ambitious Avengers game. 2020 is set to be a great year for games, as long as they are actually released, so keep an eye on Chart X Games for the latest news.